Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a geopolitical worldview from our source material, which argues that a potential military conflict in the Middle East is, believe it or not, directly tied to the very survival of the West.
And it all really kicks off with this one powerful quote cited in the source, a promise from Donald Trump to the people of Iran. According to this analysis, this single sentence is what sets the stage for a massive, high-stakes global drama.
So the whole argument starts with a really bold claim, that a U.S. military strike against Iran isn't just a possibility, it's something that feels imminent.
So you might ask, what's the evidence for that? Well, the source points to a huge military buildup, describing it as the biggest we've seen in the region since 2003. And we're not talking about a distant threat. These assets are positioned right on Iran's doorstep.
The thinking here is that you just don't move this many pieces onto the chessboard for no reason. I mean, historically speaking, when you see this level of military force gathering in one spot, some kind of action is probably going to follow.
But this isn't just about ships and planes. According to the source, this is about President Trump's personal promise and America's credibility on the world stage. With rivals like China and Russia watching their every move, the analysis argues that backing down now would be seen as a critical sign of weakness.
And a potential strike isn't seen as just an isolated event. No, the way this analysis frames it, it's actually the first domino in a plan to completely transform the entire Middle East.
The source lays out this really clear cause and effect chain. First, you topple the Iranian regime. That, in turn, cuts off its whole network of proxy forces from their main sponsor, which basically cripples them across the region.
And this illustrates the real strategic goal that's described in the source. The idea is, by targeting what it calls the head of the snake in Tehran, you could suddenly clear the path for brand new alliances, and it specifically mentions a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel as a huge possibility.
Okay, now let's zoom out. Because according to this source, this regional conflict is really just one move in a much, much larger global power struggle.
The source actually has a name for this opposition: the Gathering Storm Coalition. It identifies this as a four-nation alliance that's actively working together against Western interests on the world stage. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because it completely reframes the conflict. In this worldview, Iran isn't just some isolated threat. It's a critical piece of the puzzle, the regional troublemaker and key energy supplier for a broader anti-Western axis that's allegedly led by China.
So if you look at it through that lens, a strike on Iran suddenly has two big goals. It's not just about shaking things up in the Middle East. It's also about landing a major strategic blow against Beijing's global ambitions by knocking a key ally right off its geopolitical chessboard. But the analysis doesn't stop with external threats. It argues that the danger from this gathering storm is made so much worse by a severe internal crisis of identity and confidence that's happening within Western nations themselves.
And to really bring this point home, the source uses this incredibly powerful quote from a British veteran. It really gets to this raw, emotional feeling of loss, this sense that the very nation he fought for has changed into something he doesn't even recognize anymore.
The source then makes this really key distinction. It claims the biggest threat facing the West today isn't a traditional military invasion. No, it's a new kind of warfare, one fought on totally different battlefields, in universities, on social media, and through what it calls cultural and demographic transformation.
And here's the kicker. This is all framed as a self-inflicted crisis. Using some pretty stark language from the source, the analysis contends that Western nations aren't just passively letting this cultural shift happen, they're actively rolling out the prayer mat and making it happen themselves.
So all of this, the external threats, the internal crisis, it all leads to the final piece of the argument: the role that American leadership, and one figure in particular, plays in what's presented as this huge civilizational struggle.
The source contrasts two totally different philosophies of foreign policy. On one side, an approach that looks for dependent allies to kind of manage American decline. On the other side, an alternative that demands strong, self-reliant allies as a way to project American strength.
And within this specific narrative, Donald Trump is framed as the essential leader for this very moment. He's described as a modern-day Churchillian figure. And the last line of defense, holding back both that external coalition and the internal cultural forces that the source argues are threatening the West.
The analysis wraps up with a very stark warning that's tied to a specific date,
The year 2028 is presented as a potential tipping point, with the speaker stating that if America's path changes then, well, the lights go out on the West.
So, ultimately, the source material leaves us with this final, really provocative question. In a world it presents as being at a critical crossroads, the analysis asks, who is prepared to carry the banner for Western civilization?